Welcome to our first series of the Urban Think Campus, which we will focus on data and slums and typically the massive data gaps which exist on areas which you might know as slums or informal settlements. This event today will very much focusing on community-based approaches to bring data to these areas which are often existing without data in data sets on official maps, or data are very poor on these areas with large omissions. I won't speak too long. I will have a very short introduction from my side on why we are focusing on data and data gaps on slums, informal settlements, and then we will have a series of presenters, which my colleague Jutta will introduce then later. And we will have then finally a roundtable discussion focusing on the question on how we can bridge these data gaps existing in many global data sets as well as in local data sets. And then we hope that Anthony, who is not well today, can have a final closing, else we will do it, Julio, Jutta, and myself. Maybe a slide which you have seen or have been already encountering, that we have obviously this massive urbanization rate occurring, where we often are not aware, at least in the global north countries, that most of this growth is actually happening in areas which we call low and middle income country cities. And mostly not in the well-planned urban areas, but the deprived urban areas. Also, what we need to acknowledge that a large part of this growth is not happening necessarily in the primary cities, but often in the secondary cities, which are often very under-researched and not part and even poorer covered in existing data sets. A small notion which, for those who are not fully into the topic, we will interchangeably use the term slums, informal settlements, which often are used interchangeable. But referring to the definition of UN Habitat, slums per se is a household level concept of household level deprivation, and informal settlement is a concept of area level deprivation. We sort of put this under the entire umbrella of urban deprivation, which is acknowledging both the household level deprivation of slums as well as the area level deprivation of settlements. And it's important to have this distinct, but also to have data on both places. When we talk about urban inequalities and living conditions in cities, so we often see a lot about and think about the environment, the urban morphology, very densely built up areas which have issues of pollution, of hazards, like also visualized here with the massive waste accumulation. Many of these areas are also located in crisis areas with high instability, with also massive population dynamics, contributing to the growth of informal settlements. But often also forgotten in terms of data sets is the assets which exist in these areas. The images are taken from myself in March in Khartoum in Sudan before the crisis broke out. As well as we also need to think about aspects of the housing inequalities, but also not only thinking about how the most vulnerable groups, like people, for example, with disabilities, can access areas, which is often forgotten in terms of data sets. We have missing data on cities which are massively changing, growing, but also cities which are massively transforming and also declining, like here visualized in the case of Khartoum, where I'm looking to the situation in March before the conflict broke out, visualized by nightlight images. So you see how the city has a night footprint. Then after the conflict broke out, it has been diminishing the nightlight footprint, and the latest image in August you see that most of the city is basically abandoned because people left the city because of the armed conflict. And we don't have data on this situation. They are not easily existing in such a rapid situation. But also on a daily basis, global data sets are full of data gaps, like here in the case of the Facebook building footprints. And when we look to the more complex urban areas, like informal settlements, this data are typically like not accurately mapped, which also has to do with the question of how artificial intelligence-based algorithms are trained, and therefore community-based data are the most essential to be added to mapping approaches. I'm stopping here and giving the word to people who are really on the ground doing community-based mapping, and I think Jota is introducing the first of our speakers.
Thank you, Monika. So our first speaker is Nyambuga Kilion. He's a graduate of Urban and Regional Planner from the University of Nairobi. As a program officer at the SDIK, he has focused on ensuring access to accurate data on slum for planning. His current project manager portfolio includes the Muruko Special Planning Area, which implementation will address unique development challenges and opportunities faced by the settlement. Thank you, Nyambuga. Now the floor is yours.
I stopped sharing, so please share your presentation, Kilion.
You're muted. Kilion, if you're muted.
Sorry. Thank you very much for that introduction. I'm Nyambuga Kilion, working with Slum Dwellers International. And Slum Dwellers International is a global network of slum dwellers with national organizations in over 30 countries in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. And personally, I work for the affiliate in Kenya, which is called SDA, Slum Dwellers International Kenya, supporting the federation known as Muungano wa Vijiji. And Muungano wa Vijiji locally is pushing for inclusive cities where those from the informal settlement, the low-income areas, are also recognized and have adequate access to housing services and also live in dignity within their cities. And several tools that we are using to do that, including policy advocacy, dialogue, community-led data that we'll be talking about today, and also the planning, the community planning, which one of them has been mentioned, is Mukuru. And I wanted to share briefly some of, because I know, I think the informal settlements or the slum present themselves in different contexts from area to area. And our cases of the informal settlement, most of them have poor housing structure. As you can see in one of the photos that is presented here, mostly with very substandard materials. And we also have the aspect of also very high density. For the case of Mukuru, we notice that the density goes to over 240 houses per acre. So that is the level of density that we experiencing within the informal settlement by that time. But this is meant to even go higher when we experience evictions in part of the city or displacement as a result of even natural disasters like flooding and also fire. And we also have the inadequate access to basic services such as water, sanitation, and also the recreation amenities, the health, the education, the quality of education offered in most of the slum dwellers is not low compared to the other areas within the city. And most of this informal settlement, close to 90% of them, in the case of Nairobi City, are located along the river riparian or the lowland areas experiencing flooding and other also climate-related impacts. And also we have most importantly is also the issue of insecure land tenure, most of them being on private lands, some public lands that belong to the government. And so the communities are under constant trend of eviction. and also we have also the utility reserve areas. And this photo presents some of the issues that are being experienced in the informal settlements. Some of them, we have the flooding, displacement. We also have the pollution, contribution to the pollution of water bodies, and also the disease outbreak. And as I mentioned, SDI Kenya and the Federation are pushing for different for land and housing, but applying different methodologies in partnership with the communities to be able to achieve this. One of them is the advocacy itself on land and housing. We have also savings mobilizations. We have communities who are able to collect their data, and using all that, then they partner with other organizations, including the government, to be able to realize their goals. Having said that, the history of the community-led data by the Federation globally, initially the advocacy was done by peaceful picketing. But then when communities went to the government to have a discussion on issues that are affecting them in their communities, when they were asked about the data in their communities, most of the communities lacked the information to share with the local authorities. And so in some cases, when you asked about the number of people who are prone or who are facing eviction, the answer was almost like the general response was most of us, instead of giving the actual number of the people who are facing the eviction or who do not have access to water in their communities. And so SDI started collecting data from 1996, from the year it was established, supporting different communities and through their affiliates in different countries to be able to collect data, and also to engage with the authorities, the local authorities, using the data collected by the communities. And one of our slogan actually is that of information equals to power. So when we say information, we usually say power. So it's a tool. Information itself that is generated by community is a tool that we're using to mobilize communities to be able to participate in development issues in their locality. It's also an advocacy tool that allows us to advocate for access to land, water, sanitation, education, and all the needs of the community, but also to inform decisions around settlement improvement through planning, the housing improvement, and all sorts of that. So having said that, traditionally, SDI has supported local organizations and communities in Africa, in Asia, and also Latin America to collect their own data. And this has been done through the support for communities to be able to count themselves through enumeration, to be able to collect their general settlement information through what we call settlement profiling. And in 2013, SDI was able to, with other partners, launched a Know Your City campaign. And the Know Your City campaign was targeting to make this data accessible to different users, right from the community members to the local authorities, to the academia, and all those who would support in addressing some of the needs. And so this was a call for cities to know their people. The Know Your City itself to know their was a call for cities to be able to know their people, to know the poverty level, and also the plight of the poorest people within their cities, and to be able to work with them to address the needs and priorities identified at that local level. As a global campaign, it has enabled communities to be able to collect citywide data on slums for the basis of forging partnership between the urban poor communities and the governments. And the intended objective is to provide data that will inform decision making, but also influence policy at the city level. And most of this data then was meant to be updated within a short period of time. I think initially it was 5 years. Within 5 years, then this data was supposed to be updated. And the data was made readily available for communities and other development partners through the Know Your City campaign platform. And this campaign was able to reach over 500 cities globally and reaching more than 7,000 informal settlements. And so what kind of data were we collected, or were we collecting, were we supporting the community members to be able to collect, and why was it important? So one of it, well, the first one was the spatial data. So the spatial data to do with where these settlements located. So the settlement boundary data were very much important in doing that, locating these informal settlements within the city. We have city officials who are unable to even identify where a particular settlement is located within his or her city. We also have service location of service points and amenities like health facilities where they are relative to the settlements, how accessible they are, the local amenities like health facilities, education, and also recreational facilities. We also have the issues of land tenure and status in terms of identifying the size of land that the size of settlements, and also the location of the land. We also have the socioeconomic data to do with the total population of each of the settlements, the demographics to do with age, sex, ethnic and marital status, and also education, the level of education of members of the community. We also have, in terms of housing, in terms of the quantity, how many housing structures are within each particular communities, and what is the quality of the housing, and how much does it cost either to rent or probably to buy. Also the issues of transportation, looking at the aspect of cost that communities incur to access their areas where they work or where they do business. We also have issues to do with the economics, the income level, the employment, occupation, and also the regional growth. But lately we've seen much emphasis on also the inclusion of qualitative data through photo stories and also docu-features that are being supported by the Know Your City TV within the affiliate. And what are some of the opportunities and challenges? I'll start with the opportunities. So the data that has been collected by communities, as has been mentioned in the introduction, some of it has been put into use, effectively been used to inform planning decision. The Mukuru Special Planning Area is one of the examples where the settlement profiling data that was collected by community was extensively used in the whole planning process from the beginning to the end. And we also have the policy influence angle. So this is a powerful tool for advocating for policy changes. And also it has also been used by communities to be able to influence resources to be allocated to their areas, and also be able to address some of the issues that and priorities that they are facing at the local level. We also have this being one of the avenues that allows communities to be able to participate effectively in community development projects by allowing them to be able to have information and also to make their participation more from an informed point of view, rather than just coming to be players within the process and just to rubber stamp decisions that they do not understand. But most importantly, it has also been able to it has also been able to it has also been put to use in amplifying community-led solutions. So we have communities who have actually pioneered solutions that can be replicated in other communities. And through storytelling, documentation of their stories and all that, they've been able to share those lessons and also insights with other communities, also to be able to achieve similar experiences. But in terms of the challenges, I think one of them is more on the resource constraints. I think one of the resources to support data research is kind of reducing, but then there is continuous demand for data from the local level, either to update or to collect additional data. And at scale, this makes it a little bit more unsustainable. And the other one is the general acceptance. And we all know that initially, most of the data collected by communities were less recognized by other practitioners and also duty bearers, even at the city level. But this is slowly changing by forging partnership with academic institutions and also having partnership with the local authorities who participate in the whole planning process and are able to see the relevance of the methodologies and also the tools that are being used by communities to be able to collect this the data. The other one is misuse of data. We've seen cases where data collected by communities and shared or presented to the local authorities, to other practitioners, with a view of creating positive change has been misused, and instead ended up creating harm to the local communities. Some of these come in form of evictions, which would have then be avoided. But the last one, I think, which I would present today is more on the community fatigue. So throughout, communities have been over-researched, and without the actual change being realized at the local level. And most of the communities are kind of realizing that being over-researched without the end being an actual project responding to their local priority or needs is not welcome in most of the communities, making it difficult to be able to continuously collect data in the communities. And so one of the ways, I think, is to figure out what are the alternatives, what other methodologies can be used in cases where communities are already feeling fatigued in terms of the research. And so my last... Sorry.
Excuse me, we have like run out of time, so you can close very quickly. I would appreciate that.
I'm on my last slide. Thank you. So what are some of the tools and approaches that are already working for communities? So some of the tools have been tools that have been used for spatial mapping, and these include both the manual tools and also the use of technologies like GPS mapping, the drone mapping, making it more effective and faster for communities to be able to collect their data and present. And we have also the aspect of also storytelling, community youths from the communities being able to document through videos or through photos the stories of from their communities. But also one of the approach is more of co-creation of knowledge. Communities being able to forge partnership with the local community, with the local governments and also the academia to be able to work through the whole data collection process and also increase the validity of the data that's being generated for the community. And I just wanted to end with one of the quote from one of the community members from Viwandani through that whole planning process that has been presented, who mentioned that no matter how much money that we pump into their community, into their settlements, if they are not involved, it will definitely fail. That the solution to our problems is within us. Once we generally agree to change it, it will definitely succeed. So that is my end. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kilion. That was a beautiful presentation. I think we'll have a lot of questions on the round table. Now I want to present Dr. Dana Thomson. The emphasis of Diana's research is identification of slum residents and other populations who are underrepresented in population data, and development of tools and methods to improve population data accuracy. Her lecture, Ideamaps, Data Ecosystem, a scalable platform and process for participatory modeling of deprivations and assets across cities, especially in the slums. Dana, thank you so much for coming. The floor is yours, and I will let you know when your 10 minutes are done.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's really a pleasure to be following Kilion's presentation. I'm wearing the hat of the Ideamaps Network, Integrated Deprived Area Mapping Systems Network, and a particular project within that network. And I'll be talking to this question about how do we routinize the mapping of urban deprivations and assets, and how do we do that at scale? So this is the questions that we're trying to tackle in the Ideamaps data ecosystem. To co-create an integrated data ecosystem that can enable routine and accurate or locally validated mapping of slums, informal settlements, and other deprived areas across low and middle income countries in particular. And the data ecosystem project is starting off with close partnerships in Lagos and Kano, Nigeria, and Nairobi, Kenya, although the broader network is active globally. And check out our website, which is going under, it will be having a facelift in the coming month or so, but you can check out our website, ideamapsnetwork.org, and an early concept paper that we're still working to achieve. Like I said, this project sits within a much larger tree of projects that really kicked off with a networking grant and a lot of early thinking in 2018, 2019. I think many of the people on this panel were a part of those early conversations. We've seen an evolution of new projects as we grow. The ecosystem project has some core academic partners. The team has doubled or tripled even in the since I put this slide together a few months ago. And the basic concept of the whole Ideamaps network is to leverage the strengths of different slum mapping traditions, which have often operated in silos, and use those strengths to overcome the challenges that each of these approaches have had in the past. So Kilion, speaking from the perspective of communities and really being in the field while doing mapping, the data are locally relevant and accurate. They're referenced on the ground, but it's challenging to do this at scale, for example. Monika mentioned how we're currently using census and survey data to identify so-called slum households, which is not really representing slum areas. But that said, it's a scalable approach with fairly consistent data across settings. And it is actively scaled to monitor SDG 1111% of people living in slums and population, slums and informal settlements and adequate housing. But we also have the NGO sector that's quite active, and also local government are often using local experts to manually digitize settlements. And then we, of course, have modelers who are trying to use Earth observation and other secondary spatial data sets to predict where slums and informal settlements are located. And the strengths of this one is that it's scalable, and it has this ability to integrate diverse data types and sources. So that's really where bringing these communities of practice together and using the strengths of modeling to try to do some of that data integration. So the Ideamaps data ecosystem project has 5 work packages, which don't matter to you guys, but generally speaking, what we're doing is focusing on data, being able to produce citywide degree of deprivation maps, as well as what we're calling domains or types of deprivation. So specifically access to water and sanitation, as an example, and then produce data summaries and visualizations at the local scale and the community level. Doing this through a platform that has some very specific functions, the ability to create fair exchanges of data between some key stakeholders, which are communities, the people who are the subject of what we're mapping, and local governments who often hold the purse strings and the power to be able to make change at the community scale. Modelers are part of this triangle as basically an intermediary to help with data production and data validation. The idea is to generate an ecosystem where there's continually updates of data because each stakeholder is getting something out of the ecosystem at the same time they can be putting something into the ecosystem, and it can basically be a living entity, and that it can also start to plug into existing local spatial data infrastructures. For example, local city government could take advantage of the data that are constantly being produced. We're also producing training and mentorship in not just the 3 cities where we're starting, but what we're calling expansion cities, with the idea being that this entire ecosystem might be picked up by new cities and expanded globally. And how we do this is super important to us. Engagement, of course, community, local government, modelers through a co-design process, joint data collection, really focusing on a few key communities to get started, a few key cities to get started. And in the modeling of data, using that modeling capabilities to integrate lots of different data, doing this in a way that's just, that brings justice to people who are the subjects of data collection. And so that is, the output is really some guidelines, some diagrams, and a case study of how we're doing that in our project. We're also have just launched a community of practice among people who do these kind of advanced, fancy artificial intelligence and machine learning models. Not only thinking about how do we engage with communities and local governments and other key stakeholders, that important process, but also what are some of the, the nitty gritty of some of the modeling techniques that are available, and how do we integrate these diverse data, things like the Know Your City campaign data. How do we work with that in the data ecosystem and make it iterative and open? And then how we do this also is having a platform that works for people. So it has a lot of different data. It's got privacy by design, not only for data producers, so the Know Your City campaigns, the private sector, if there are Earth observation products in there, that all of the kind of use requirements are met, but also centering the user experience. Is this actually useful to community members, for example, to actually be able to get something out of this platform and have the incentive to contribute to it continually? Same for others. So I really want to spend most of my time actually talking about this participatory modeling process. This is kind of a first draft of explaining the process that we're in. There's 4 groups of stakeholders, and top and center are community members. These are the people in specific communities in Lagos, Kano, and Nairobi in our project. But really, this is generalizable to other modeling initiatives that aim to produce data for justice and development, etc. So community, and then we also build on top of community. The next bucket is community plus the change makers in the local context. So in our projects, that's community and city managers or people in local government. And then expanding that to all people who might be interested in the data. So community, city managers, plus the academics, the NGOs, the global agencies like UN Habitat. And then in another bucket are the modelers, data scientists who might be involved with some of the data integration. And the goal here is fair exchanges of data, justice in our modeling approaches that center communities and lead to actual change, and really facilitate like an innovation, a community of practice where we can support each other. So in this project, we've really started with communities and first making sure that what we produce is relevant. It's grounded in the realities of people in the specific communities and the cities that we're working with. And that it's generative, that data, we're facilitating a process of understanding mainly between communities and local government. These, bringing these stakeholders together with data to make decisions is really going to be the key for upgrading and sustainable change. So how do we make that happen? And then also that we're on the same page about what are shared priorities. So having a process where we can, in a specific city, communities, local government can decide where to start in this process of data production and use. And that it's feasible from a modeling perspective. So maybe producing a first kind of crude model with existing data sources and just seeing, can we kind of mock up something that might work? And then bringing it back and validating it at the community scale and with local government, making sure that the data are not only accurate and valid at a local level, but that it's usable, that the actual data formats that we're producing and what's required to access them, like, do you need a GIS program to access data? Well, it's probably not that accessible to certainly communities and maybe even some local governments. And then does it lead to real impact? And does it have this potential to scale? And then that's really bringing it back to the full set of stakeholders that include agencies, academics, and NGOs. And then really refining those models, iterating the models to make sure that they are transferable and feasible, and they've brought in all the different perspectives of stakeholders. And the concept is to keep scaling, as we scale, is to test all of this and do especially the outside loop in this process, validation, usability, and impact in many new places. Ideally, any new city that brings on the data ecosystem would go through at least the outside loop. So this double loop process is something that we've adopted very closely in the Ideamaps data ecosystem. We use it throughout all of the co-design process, either sometimes validating within our team, which has people who are local experts in it from community and local government perspectives, and then bringing it out to a wider community of practice. But that general process of the double loop is very useful, I think, to scale as to the whole data ecosystem and bringing it to new places. And the last thing I want to say that I don't have on my slide, but I think if you're seeing my cursor, I'm down here on the bottom that says impactful and priority. And I think that Ideamaps as a network, we often started our engagements with all users, communities, local governments, academics, NGOs, etc. So in the past, we've started our projects trying to figure out, is it relevant and generative for everybody, and is it a priority for everybody? And this has been highly problematic because not all people, when they come to a workshop or something and are literally sitting around a table, not everyone carries the same amount of power into the room. And so we still hear voices, maybe they speak the language of the facilitators, of the academics in the room or the modelers in the room. Maybe, so we're hearing those voices more clearly. Also, the priorities of those might be articulated with a little bit more power. There's more authority behind the city local government expert who really undermines what a community member might say. So it's just to be reflective and honest with ourselves within this kind of group of data scientists and academics who are very keen to see communities empowered by data, and to see the real productive conversation happen between community and local government. Like starting with this process of bringing all stakeholders to the room and assuming equality probably doesn't work. And this is why we've really backtracked to think about how do we center communities and work first with communities to first create the equity. So, understanding the language of communities and those realities first, making sure that we bring in local government next to think about change making, and then bringing it to all stakeholders. And so this is a general process that we hope is not only relevant for what we call slum modeling or any kind of mapping of assets and deprivations across cities that involve slums, but just other modeling initiatives. In this project, we've got a first phase where we're doing engagement and development. It's the internal loop. A second phase of refinement and characterizing deprived areas. That's the outside loop. And then phase 3 is really kind of a third loop around all of this, which is scaling to new locations. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dana. That was really wonderful. I'm sure we will discuss a lot about that kind of model in our roundtable. And I want to introduce our next two speakers. Our first speaker is María Lucía Groos. María has a degree in economics and serves as the director of the Center for Research and Social Innovation at TECHO, Argentina, where she works in the generation of information on habitat and housing in popular neighborhoods. She's currently accompanies the implementation of RENABAP in conjunction with the Secretariat of Social and Urban Integration. She's presenting on the methodology of National Survey of Popular Neighborhoods of Argentina and the challenges for the survey with a comprehensive view of a diverse territory. She's accompanied by, next slide, Monika, by Juan Manuel Atoli. Juan Manuel has served as a technical responsible for the National Registry of Popular Neighborhoods, the Secretariat of Social and Urban Integration of the Ministry of Social Development of the Government of Argentina since 2016. He previously held the position of the National Director of Informal Settlement Survey at TECHO, Argentina. María and Juan, welcome to our presentation. I will let you know when your time is complete.
Thank you
floor
very
is
much for
yours.
having us. Ahí cargo. Okay. So together with Juan Manuel, we are going to tell you about the experience of community mapping in Argentina, which we carry out through the National Registry of Urban Slums and Informal Settlements. First of all, I would like to tell you that in our country, we refer to this type of urbanization as barrio popular, which literally translates into popular neighborhoods. However, to avoid confusions, we will call them slums. To begin with, let's look at some important data in our country. There are almost 46 million people in Argentina, primarily living in cities. And at this moment, a significant portion of our population is experiencing poverty. There are many reasons and many causes, but nowadays we are in a huge economic crisis. So 40% people population is below poverty. And usually we would take slums information out of the census data. However, what it provides is not enough. So it's worth mentioning that official information about slums in Argentina didn't exist before 2016 when we conduct our own survey to create the registry. So these are the main points of what we're information settlement survey at TECHO in Argentina, and we carry out with thousands of volunteers and neighbors of the slums. In 2016, there we identified around 4,000 slums in Argentina, and this survey and methodology was taken by the government and social organizations and extended to nationwide locations with more than 10,000 settled survey. In 2017, the government declares the creation of RENABAP and family housing certificate. And in 2018, they create the law of social urban integration of slums. And currently at TECHO and in partnership with the government, we are carrying out the extension and update of the registry. And the government is working at the social urban integration policies.
So now I'm gonna talk about what makes a neighborhood a slum. Here I present you the key points of our definition. It has to be created as a result of different land occupation strategies. It has to show distinct levels of precariousness and overcrowding, a minimum of 8 grouped or continuous families, no land ownership title, no formal access to at least 2 of the basic utility services, such as tap water, electric power distribution, and sanitary sewage. For us, having access to a basic service means having a meter installed outside our front door. When the service provider can measure consumption, we receive a monthly bill that we pay for the provided service. This recognition is essential. It acknowledges us not only as users, but also as citizens within a community. Thanks to a presidential decree, this definition has had legal validity since the year 2017. As I said before, as Lucía said before, for the first time as from 2016, we have explored street by street, block by block, plot by plot, all urban areas throughout the country to identify each slum. This methodology allows us to draw the polygons of the surface area occupied by each slum. The image on the right illustrates this. It displays the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires and the location of the slums in it. We assign a central role to community leaders. They provide all the necessary data to register the characteristics of the slums, so we can conduct an assessment on each one of them. We gather data in regards to the number of families, access to services, the presence of risk factors, and property ownership status, among others. Since the slums are not present in official land registries, in order to proceed with the housing survey, we first had to create our own cartography. This led us to train young residents of slums in geographic information systems so that by analyzing satellite images, they could draw nearly 1 million individual parcels. Social organizations helped us to gather around 13,000 residents from slums who went door to door to survey each family. To date, we have successfully surveyed 79% of the estimated households. Today, over 800,000 families possess a family housing certificate, the first official recognition of their residence. For the first time in history, these certificates allows them to provide proof of address, which grants this segment of the population a significant acknowledgement of their living situation. Here you can see the most relevant nationwide data, showing how these types of neighborhoods are distributed by province. There are more than 5,000 registered slums where 1.1 million families reside. It's important to note that the majority of the plots where the slums are informally located are privately owned, with only a small percentage being under state ownership. As you can observe, in the majority of the slums, their residents predominantly lack formal access to basic services, electricity, tap water, sewage system, and gas network. The mostly widely available service in a formal manner is electricity, which reaches only 34% of the slums. The predominant methods for accessing basic utilities are through informal connections to electricity and water network. Due to the lack of sewage system, waste disposals is done through cesspools or pit latrines. Because of the absence of natural gas network, bottled gas is predominant source for cooking, and wood burning is used for heating. As I mentioned before, the urban diagnosis we built with the participation of community leaders enable us to create this type of thematic cartography. For example, this area of Buenos Aires has a high concentration of slums, with several risk factors such as streams next to construction areas, landfills, and flood-prone areas. Next, I will show you some images of risk factors which in the Buenos Aires metropolitan area affect 86% of the slums. In this case, we can see how a train travels through the same space between the houses, which also serves as a pedestrian pathway. Flooding due to precipitation is the most prevalent risk factor, followed by waste disposal sites in the second place. Clearly, the situation on the population in many slums is alarming. Julie?
So finally, as I said at the beginning, the registry serves as the foundation for the social rural integration law. This process was impulsed by the neighbors of slums, and this law, declares of public interest and eligible for expropriation popular neighborhood land, suspend evictions for 4 years for all RENABAP registered neighborhoods, declares of public interest social rural integration regime of RENABAP neighborhoods, and the 25% of public works in popular neighborhoods must be awarded to cooperatives and workers of the informal economy. So to close, this is a unique policy for us that use community-driven diagnosis to develop solutions with the active participation of neighbors. And overall, this approach aims to promote social urban integration. So thank you very much for for listening.
Thank you, Lucía and Juan. Oh, that was a wonderful presentation. Incredible, the world of data that you have been able to collect over the years. Thank you for sharing your work. Our next presenter is Victor Marchezini. Victor has a PhD in sociology from the Federal University of San Carlos, and he's a specialist in human rights, global risk management, and public policies for disaster prevention. Currently working as a researcher at the Brazilian National Center for Monitoring and Warning of Natural Disasters, CEMADEN. His lecture is about what are people-centered warning systems. Who are the people in warning systems? What are the people's needs in terms of data? The talk discusses concepts, methods, and data to understand people's vulnerabilities and capacities to cope with socio-environmental extremes. Thank you, Victor. And now the floor is yours.
Thank
I will let you know when your time is done.
Thank you, Jota, and the team. I need permission to share my screen.
Tony, can you help us with this?
Let me try. Can you see the PowerPoint presentation? Yeah, good. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Oh, sorry, we can see your screen, but we cannot see the slides. I'm seeing right now your desktop and a window of where the files are.
Let me try again. Stop sharing. I think it's screen one.
Yes.
And now, yes. Oh, great.
Perfect.
So I think my expertise is disaster risk management. One thing that I consider important is the concepts that we are using, not only in the research community, but also in governments. So I had reading many studies that focus on vulnerabilities and hazards, but I think it's also important to consider the capacity aspects and mainly the types of risk mitigation policies that we can implement, that we can create to reduce some of these risks. And sometimes I think I'm not seeing too much works, too many studies focus on these risk mitigation aspects and how to change, how to reduce the disaster risk scenarios. So I think one important dimension is the concepts, and the second, the types of methods that we are using, how the social science are being engaging these studies, how we can use different types of qualitative and quantitative data. So this is important because to think about concepts and also methods, because as an institution, as a public organizations, I can see how we are dealing with different types of data, and most data are focused on hazards, but we are not using data about capacities and risk mitigation policies. And this is an example. So we have this framework used by my organization that receives different types of data from Brazilian governments, from Water Agency, Brazilian Geological Survey, and we are sending warnings without information about what is happening on the local communities or neighborhoods or even cities. So to sum up, we have dynamic data being used in this system to show how hazards are changing, but based on your previous presentations, we could also include dynamic data about what's going on at the cities, especially in urban sprawl and conflicts and other types of social dynamics. So in this framework, CEMADEN, my home institution, need to send warnings to the National Civil Defense, and ideally, this local civil defense will also include communities. So this type of top-down approach we need to change, and we need methods and concepts to show how. So basically, CEMADEN has included a lot of information about hazards in this GIS platform. This is an example. Also information about soil moisture, and we have also incorporated information about exposure and vulnerability based on a partnership with Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics. But the people who are working at the monitoring room are not using this type of data because routinely they are not, they have their own way to monitor, right? So I think this is one important of cultural aspects that we need to consider when we develop research and try to change the way institutions are using our data. We will face a type of cultural resistance to this citizen-generated data and other aspects. I think we will have more time to discuss this in the roundtable. So another important concept that we are trying to implement at CEMADEN and to discuss is the concept of people-centered warning systems. So our types of data and information that we are sharing is still focused on hazard aspects. So we are not including too much information about what's going on with people, what people needs. So this type of change, it's necessary, right? This is a recommendation of the United Nations, but the challenge is how you implement the people-centered warning system. What are the people-centered warning systems? So this is one example. We had an educational project here at the CEMADEN, and we had a cultural resistance of some scientists that didn't understand why an education project it's important at the Brazilian Early Warning Center. So we need to show using these quantitative methods that we had a lot of schools in landslide and flood-prone areas. But we also need to engage, creating methods to engage people in the warning systems. So we create a lot of methodologies, citizen science methodology that try to engage the high school in develop their own research and to share data with CEMADEN. In this CEMADEN educational project, we try to create methods to engage people in different steps of warning systems, not only to receive a warning, but also to identify what 30 millimeters of rain in 1 hour, what this data means in terms of information. Do people know what 30 millimeters means, what this data means? So we need to work with people to develop, to work with data, information, and knowledge, and what are the difference between these different concepts. So we also had a partnership with the Waterproofing Data Project led by Professor João Porto de Albuquerque, where we created this app, right? So the students learn how to monitor floods, what this data about rain gauge means, and how they develop research, and they started to share data. And this data was also available not only in the app, but also in the dashboard. And we realized that the local civil defense need this type of support from apps, from computer science, because they don't have financial resources to produce their own data, their own apps, I'm sorry. So this is something that is very important to connect. Some of the methodologies produced by this project were shared in some publications. We used OpenStreetMaps, and we identify how some areas, for instance, Rio Branco in the Brazilian Amazon, we had a lack of data and information in OpenStreetMaps, and we try to improve this situation because this was very important for civil defense in disaster prevention and response. We also analyze, how we still need to think about how we translate data and information and knowledge to some groups of people that are not being included in the warning systems, such as people with visual impairment. So sometimes we have these hazard-prone maps, but they are not being feasible for people with visual impairments. So we created this methodology, this hazard tactile maps, trying to identify how to include people with visual impairments. Finally, we have developed and used different types of methods, some of them participatory methods, some of them not. But I think we still need to discuss with communities what types of data they think it's important to change their realities. And this is one example that I think connects with the first of our presentation that mentioned the community fatigue, right? This city of São Luís do Paraitinga received a lot of research, a lot of surveys, and people were exhausted. And we had to use the participatory 3D mapping to create an environment of trust, right? In a way that people could engage. And then we started to discuss not only the risk perception, the hazard perception, but what people consider as important to improve the conditions of the city to be more resilient to floods. And this changed, but we also, finally, we still have, in my view, some challenges. For instance, sometimes we identify ideas, we have a lot of proposals, but we don't have the means to implement these proposals. And we need to think this financial resources or business model that can help to implement some of these actions. So thank you very much for your time.
Victor, thank you so much for that presentation. It's incredible to see the vulnerabilities of people living in informal settlements, and how this data really help us to understand that. With that, thank you so much. We finished our set of conference, and now we move to our roundtable. And so we have a set of experts that has welcome to join us here for this discussion. Sophie, you, Abigail Kemper, Patricia Brito, María Najam, Noti, Anna Winters, Blessing, Manchis, Hannah, George Pierre, and Boris Serha. Sorry if I butcher your names. I apologize for it. I think there were very interesting sets of conferences or presentations that we have today. Kilion started us with an interesting look. He poses very interesting questions about the history of collecting data with communities in Morocco, and all the way to the end that he brings us to this question about community exhaustion, about working and creating data. Dana, on the other side, presented a more global scale of this kind of very interesting exercise of trying to create this new way of creating data. She presented unique versions about how to validate the data about informal settlements, and to how this process using different technologies make it more important. Lucía and Juan Manuel did an incredible effort to try to explain the incredible work of TECHO over the last decades in a very short time, and shows how their efforts went from the mapping of very accurate data using communities to the actual changing of legislation of part of that big efforts. And Victor brought the other kind of important issue about the collection of data, that it was this idea of that if communities in informal settlements or slums are living in risk, is this data the one that is really important to bring into the equation to actually prevent and support these communities. So I think it's very interesting how this, and at the end, I thought it was very interesting that Victor and Kilion ended with the same kind of concern about, you know, how we exhaust communities' interests as we work with them. And he proposes also methods to engage with that. I wanted to start this first roundtable shooting a question to Sophie about, you know, her reflections about the particular presentations, but also to talk a little bit about and start reflecting about the kind of data that we need to collect about informal settlements and why we need the data. Sophie, if you could start us. And then from there on, we could have a more informal kind of discussion.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Zampa. And first of all, I would like to also thank all 4 or 5 panelists for their contributions and for sharing their knowledge and case studies. This was very, very interesting. Just a short introduction from my side. My name is Sophie Naue, and I'm working as a scientific lead and project coordinator for UNITAC. For those who are not familiar with UNITAC, UNITAC is the UN Technology Accelerator for Cities, an almost 2.5 years running partnership among UN Habitat, OICT, and the Hafen City University, where our lab is based. And with UNITAC, we support national and local governments in their digital transition. We work a lot with communities, different participatory approaches using digital data. And related to the topic, we developed as well a pilot project where we do mapping, or where we mapped or we developed a tool mapping the city of Etiquini, or automating and assisting the city to improve its data information and mapping processes. And I have several questions as well to our participants related to the potentials of those mapping tools, but as well a little bit more related to potential risks, because mapping communities makes community visibles, and I liked it really much from the first presentation, that this visibility brings benefits for planning, to provide basic service delivery. But however, such data collection must respect the privacy of residents and their communities. And we need to stick to human rights guidelines, align with standards of data. So I had one question as well to our participants. And I'm curious a little bit, how do you deal with this situation? How you respect privacy of residents mapping? And related to the question on informal settlements, slum-related mapping, what data is most important? I think in order to develop pipelines for basic service delivery, for upgrading interventions, we need to have an overview of settlements. So mapping is important. We need to have a number and extents of informal settlements, know how settlements are growing over time. So mapping is an important tool. It's very time consuming, and we have to see, because we have here these challenges that outdated records makes it difficult to plan upgrading interventions. So I think to have an overview of informal settlements, households living in settlements, but on the other hand, to respect as well privacy of communities. And here I'm curious as well how you do it in your work. So this,
I wonder if one of our panelists would like to answer that.
I would like to jump in if that's okay. So with the Ideamaps process, when you start with asking that question that the set of questions that you've just asked, Sophie, and thank you for those. When you start with community, and you know, you end up with some very different needs for data when you want to ask for protection. So when we brought these questions to communities, they said, well, yes, of course, somebody else wants to know what the boundary of our settlements are, and wants to know the boundary of settlements across the city. But we don't necessarily want our boundaries to be on a map anywhere, because we don't want to find ourselves evicted or fined or harassed. And so through an iterative process, the Ideamaps network has adopted an approach where we would like to, where we're modeling in grid cells about 100 meter in size. So it's about the size of a city block, and using these kind of approximate boundaries. So you can still classify data into general areas that are still quite fine scale, but you're not drawing exact boundaries. You're not labeling this as Makuru or as Kibera. And this seems to be a balance that has been acceptable to different stakeholders throughout that whole process. But first of all, starting with communities that, and another thing that we're thinking about is mapping these surfaces of deprivation so that we are not defining where the boundaries are. That someone else, a city government, for example, or UN Habitat for SDG 11 purposes might be able to say, okay, at 50%, we draw the line and that's a slum and that's a non-slum or something like this for kind of like large scale monitoring purposes. But when it comes to the ground, we're not labeling things as slums or byrows or informal settlements. So what other language, I know in the chat, there's lots of language and that forms a very complex Venn diagram that are all overlapping and slightly different, but that's not the interest of Ideamaps. And then another important part to emphasize is that, at the local scale, like local governments want to know what is slum and what is non-slum. There's some monitoring kind of planning purposes for that. But what communities and local government need to actually do planning and upgrading and advocacy work is more on focus on the types of deprivation. So it's, where are the toilets? Where's the electricity coverage? I think I forgot the speaker who was, I think it was Lucía and Juan who were talking about, electricity coverage. Those are the things that actually that lead to change and upgrading. And so that is another reason that we are focusing on mapping those deprivations, types of deprivation, with the idea that, in the academic and UN world and in high level government world, you can aggregate those pretty easily to create kind of general definitions, highlight cells on a map in a raster grid format that are slum and non-slum, and do some kind of calculations with it that are very useful and practical at this kind of scale, but that also serve the local needs for planning, upgrading, and advocacy.
I think Dana's answer is very interesting in the sense that she's taking a very interesting perspective in how to preserve identities by using this larger scope. But I would like to see what is the, maybe Lucía and Juan answer to that, since their approach of TECHO is very granular. And so maybe you have a different kind of view about, the dangers of visibility in that sense.
Yes, in our case, to be in our registry is a benefit for the families, because we have a law that suspends evictions. And also every family, we had survey more than 800,000 families. We have all their personal information, their number of ID, everything. That's why, because we can give them the housing certificate. So in our case, it's a benefit. At the beginning, I don't know how to say, but we took the risk because we knew we wanted to have this law. So we had to first take the information and then we make that law. And we are very careful with the personal data. We don't transfer that information to anyone.
Wonderful. And I also, like you show how that gathering that data helped change, national law as part of that process. I would like to give the floor maybe to Judy Baker, and to see what maybe she could bring one of new answers issues to this, maybe from her kind of global perspective. Mariana, you have raised your hand. Can you please introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm from University of São Paulo, and we've been working with laser LIDAR data with the the municipal government, and it has been really nice how we can accelerate the mapping from slums. So my question comes from this, but first for Dana, I would like to understand if there is in the project provision to incorporate initiatives that are not the cities that you have already chosen. Then for Kilion, I would like to know from him, because he mentioned about GPS, and I would like to know if they use the smartphones in order to do this mapping, or this is something that they are desiring to have these equipments in order to accelerate it. And then I have one question for Lucía, as they did a huge mapping that I was astonished if they also used laser data or LIDAR data, if they had any chance to use this kind of data, because we know that many cities are buying this data in order to have their information for taxes. And then that's how we got it from São Paulo, and now we are processing also Salvador and Belo Horizonte. And finally, I would like to give a comment on the question regarding the fatigue of getting people involved in all these initiatives of mapping. We are also in the center that I work with, the Center for Metropolitan Studies, we are working with schools, especially because we believe that if we have something within schools, that we have young people coming always, then maybe this fatigue from the community, we can, like, given another perspective, having more chances of having a continuous mapping and exchanging everything else. I know that I just sent many questions, but hopefully.
Let's see if one of our panelists would like to answer that. One of the many questions that Mariana presented.
I think, yeah, there was a direct question to Kilian. Maybe you'd like to answer.
Yeah, maybe I can start. The question on whether we're using the fonts, I think it depends on the level of data or the objective of the data collection process that we have. In most cases, we've used the fonts to be able to collect the GPS coordinates of service location and also those other infrastructure within the settlement. But where in cases where we are actually targeting the actual projects, planning projects, like the case of Mukuru, then we're looking at devices with a high level of accuracy. And so GPS devices have been used in that case. And in terms of the contribution when it comes to the fatigue, I think the fatigue doesn't come from communities being probably their inability to collect data continuously, but then their inability, the issue of them being used as subjects of data collection. So questions that in cases where probably us researchers are not being able to coordinate our research work. So for example, today, Dana coming with the data collection initiative, probably similar questions targeting a community. And the next week, another researcher, the same one, without, in the long run, communities being unable to get results or maybe projects out of the data collection or the research that we continuously conduct in their settlement. So it's not about them being able to continuously participate as data collectors, but as subjects of data collection or research. Yeah.
Wonderful.
If I may, just to stress this point, because I've been hearing this so many times from many community groups saying, we researchers, we always extract data, but we never bring anything back. So it's always a one channel flow, and we need really to think very careful how to give information and useful information back to communities. And in many research projects, this is not very well thought through. Over to you, Jota.
Oh, thank you, Monika. I think that was important to stress that. Have another question. Another question from the floor. Judy asked, as a big consumer for slum data all over the world for analysis, project investing and monitoring evaluation, the issue is always about having regular and current data at scale. Any thoughts on how to most effectively go to scale? So maybe Victor or Lucía, Juan Manuel could take that.
Sorry, I lost connection. Can you tell me again the question, please?
So I think it's more about how to scale up data, how to go big and how to maintain that data available and updated.
Okay, we started like 15 years ago. I don't remember how long ago. First, we're starting with a survey and mapping only one small city. 2 years later, we scale it to all the metropolitan area of Buenos Aires. 2 years later, we scale it to many provinces of Argentina. So we did it like step by step. But for us to scale, if we have like resources, like money, it's easier to scale. So when we were an NGO, it was really hard to have enough money to make something like nationwide. Our main goal was to talk with the government, and now as we work with the government, I am a worker of the government, it's easier to scale.
Okay,
Yeah.
I see that Victor and Kilion have their hands raised. Do you want to answer to this particular question?
Kilion, you can speak first.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say that I think there is a time value in data or information being generated from the community. And once that process probably takes a longer period of time, then the information also loses value and require more continuous updating. So there's need also to include, to infuse technology in data that is generated by communities. And so it's important to also include technology in those different methodologies that are being also used by different communities. So that's what I wanted also to.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Victor,
I think, for instance, here at CEMADEN, we have an agreement with Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, and we use the data about the new census to update some of the information about exposure and vulnerability in landslides and flood-prone areas. And I think this is important, right? Because the size of Brazil. But I think the challenge is once you develop an app or other form that to collect this data is how you can keep the community or the school mobilized in the project. And what Professor Mariana mentioned earlier is very important, how you include the new generations to use this participatory mapping and other tools and to maintain an app alive, right? And I think it's something that's also very important is that we developed this app through the waterproofing project, but then the project ends and you need some institution to adopt the app and to keep the database. So when Professor João presented this to the director of CEMADEN, the director of CEMADEN needs an idea about the budget, the investment that would be necessary to keep the app, right? So I think sometimes we need to think these long-term strategies to keep this the app and the database, right?
Thank you, Victor. I know Dana has raised her question, her hand to answer, but maybe I would like to go to another question, and maybe Dana could help us to answer that one. So Abigail Kemper has one question.
Thank you. I'm just really enjoying this conversation. My name is Abigail Kemper. I'm from Open Cities Lab in South Africa. We've done research to increase social inclusion in digital space and digital society for a few years. And I'm also part of the UNITAC project. I've just joined Sophie in Hamburg. But I also, many years ago, established a project called Taxi Map. We were mapping minibus taxi routes, and we had a clear vision initially to run it as a business so that it would be sustainable to map the mobility options for people in informal areas. And I'm so inspired by the presentations today and the conversation, because I completely agree that we need to take responsibility for the communities that we're serving. It's not enough just to survey and enumerate and collect data for planning that will eventually maybe someday in the future help them. And if governments don't change, maybe someday they will benefit from some maybe housing policy. All these things are long-term planning and sometimes unsustainable. So I'm really excited about the discussion that's happening, and to say that adding value is central to the research process. We can't just go in to improve our own knowledge, as we all know. And I've heard in all your examples that there's been an ultimate value add at the end, whether it's knowledge is power, empowering communities to represent themselves, whether it's citizen science and empowering students to understand the science that's affecting them and be empowered to respond in mitigation, so risk scenarios. That's brilliant. Also having a housing certificate as protection from eviction. These are incredible services that have been outcomes of the projects that we've discussed today. And the big question for me is how to make them sustainable, how to make them long-term. And I hope we can think more like entrepreneurs and business people to sustain these services. I know that for the Argentinian case, it's only a 4-year protection against evictions. What then? What after? And I hope that the students that participated in the identifying of slums or of homes and dwellings through satellite imagery are now empowered to participate in some other way. So I'm very excited. I don't have any answers, but I think this is very fruitful and a good way forward that we take responsibility as researchers.
Dana, do you like to answer that one?
Yeah, I wanted to address the question about scalability, but also have a question for others. So I'm thinking of communities and local government as these two key stakeholders, and then forming a triangle where the third bucket is probably a lot of the folks on this call: academics, NGOs, agencies, outside people who have data capacities. And I see that being able to create exchange and trust among each side of that triangle is really important. I think the way that you scale is for an exchange to happen between each of these three types of groups. So local government and data people, we can provide tools, we can build tools, we can produce data, we can integrate community data, we can bring data back to communities. That is something that we can definitely work on. And with local government, we can do something similar. And so I think in terms of scaling, if our tools have feedback mechanisms, that will help with sustainability, create these living data ecosystems, something that's, I think the modeling and predicting into areas or using old data to predict the future, those also help to address some of the data fatigue questions, or working in places like South Sudan or in Sudan, where you just don't have people on the ground who are prioritizing data collection at this moment because there's other, you know, basic security needs, or during a flood or something, you just don't have those abilities to do data collection from the community perspective, but you need data in those moments. And so models can help fill some of those gaps. The third thing I wanted, or the last thing I wanted to raise though as a question is, oftentimes it's the relationship between the community and the local government where a lot of the change happens. And that is really what communities need most, is for local government to have that trust and exchange. And what communities, I'd be curious, I saw there was like a ranking that that Juan and Lucía were talking about, or maybe it was Victor during the water project, but ranking kind of as it related to, you know, your specific project, what communities wanted to get out. But I think generally when we've asked the kind of more general question, what do communities want to get out of data and data partnerships, is they really want to be able to report something to local government and for a local government to react to it and deal with it. Like that relationship is something that we have a lot of trouble doing as data producers, because we can't control local government's incentive to respond and to actually respond. I'm wondering if anybody here has ideas about facilitating that exchange, because that's really where change happens. That's what communities, from what I understand, are often seeking and will sustain these kind of partnerships.
It's very interesting, Dana. Thank you so much. Patricia, I wanted to give you the opportunity to maybe collect some of this, but also to ask your question. Patricia, you're still muted.
I'm trying, yeah. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. I can hear you now.
Oh, good. All right. Well, thank you for beautiful presentations. I was, like Abigail, very excited and very inspired about all of them. I've been, you know, talking to so many people around those things. So I do have lots of thoughts. But, well, my name is Patricia. I work here in Salvador, Bahia, in Brazil, and very closely to many communities and community mapping in Slums. But I'm going to address two questions that I wrote here. One for Kilion, and talking about what he said, how can we have, I'd like to hear a little bit more about what he sees as possibilities or examples of making data actually accessible to Slum members. I mean, I think we do need to improve a lot more those dashboards or map visualizations, or is there other things that he can see as examples that would make this actually useful, be appropriate to them? And also, how can we assure, this is something that I've been talking to other people too, and then how can we assure Slum participation when we still have resistance of government, university, financial institutions to financially support, disclose, and long-term participation of people in those projects? Because many of the projects, they will be looking for people that are in the academic or related to some sort of institution. And every time you go to a different group or to make a project, and many people say, no, but this is for their good. Like if they had the time that we are being paid for the project, and sometimes they're not. So and these ideas, especially from the government, it's really hard to deal with. And if we do want to do some sort of co-design process, at least people need to be really in the process all the way, all stages. So I do want to hear a little bit more. And just to comment on two little things that you said, I think I do agree with the Mariana and Victor approach on schools and youth. I think this is actually something that we can address more. And also the idea of having close and very aware attention to hear the short-term needs of those communities. Because many times we have those projects that we need to do something related to, for example, flooding, like Victor said, but there are other needs, and they're tired, like all Q said, they're tired of giving data, but they have other means that can be I don't know, addressed. So, and making the arts and music, I think it's really nice example that he said. We do have some examples here too involving arts, and sometimes the potential of getting funding for this and making impact and short-term impact, and also small courses, English courses, all these other kind of things are really interesting. So yeah, that's about it.
Thank you, Patricia. Since we have very few, we have run out of time. I just want to leave that question on the floor and open this space to the last person, that is Jereen here. If you could present yourself and then maybe try to answer that and bring back your question. Jereen, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Yes, so my name is Jereen Pierre. I'm a researcher at MIT Media Lab under City Science Group, where we're focusing on the future development of sustainable cities. I'm an architect and urban designer, and my research often deals with climate justice, equitable planning, and innovative technological design solutions. Particularly at City Science Group, we're investigating how new models for urban systems can be more responsive to the unique needs of cities. And we have an ongoing initiative called The Power of Without, where we are providing a roadmap to understand and work and collaborate with informal settlements globally, where we've also provided a toolkit for new technologies to shape existing and future communities. Currently, and I will ask this question if we have time to fully dive in, but currently my focus of my research is looking at the potential of urban mining, specifically looking at the informal e-waste and recycling sector in West Africa, in which particularly I worked with the capital city of Ghana, Accra, where I mapped streams of informality and activities within the sort of informal, bottom-up informal economic sector. So one of the questions that I actively am asking the panelists is, what strategies have been used to highlight the informal bottom-up economic activities in informal settlements and slums? I know particularly for me and some of the challenges and the way I'm trying to work through my research is that within the informal sector, there's an opportunity to collect data on types of informal economic activities, even through the scale of street vending, manufacturing, and recycling. But there's a potential for understanding the diversity and dynamics of the informal sector in which we can identify opportunities for growth and inform policies that are supportive. Because one thing that we know is that through the trend of informality and growing informal developments, not only do we have to address the environmental risk, but there is the sort of socio and economic dependency that comes from communities making a living. And so that's something that I find really fascinating and challenging to bring across. And I think in terms of when we think about what can this data be used for, there could be the opportunity of being able to collect this information, provide it to the government for them to understand, like, there's an opportunity to think about adequate infrastructure to harness these markets and flows, but then also thinking about developing better roads and other forms of systems of services and training. So I'll keep it at that because I don't want to go over, but I'm just interested to know how the panelists have been addressing the bottom-up economic sector in their work and mapping. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Joey. Thank you so much. All the RT commentators for your questions. I want to close the roundtable. Maybe ask the panelists if they wanted to have a last sentence to try to answer. I know this will be possible to do in the time that is available. And I wanted to thank all the panelists for their presentations too. And after that, we will go to Monika, who will do the closing.
Well, thanks a lot. And I hope that we will go into more detail in some of the questions in the two coming events. And I hope you are also interested joining us there. I think we will very much look to many aspects we have been covering now on the question on scalability, which is a true important question, because I love this question of the global data user, but also the question of having updated data, the timeliness of data is really important. Access to data but this is very much, of course, a focus from a research perspective. What we have been, I think, today, and that's something I found super interesting from the community perspective, to understand what are the incentives for communities to be collecting data with us, and also the call of what Kilion was saying. Yeah, it does make sense if you collect data on our communities, if you don't do it with us, because the data will be not useful. So we really need to understand what are the needs, what are the incentives, but also not bringing wrong hopes to communities, saying at next year things you will have a perfect road or whatever. So we need to be also careful what we promise in our data collection exercises and engagements. And I like this term of data partnership, to have fair data partnerships, and thinking about models of sustainability long-term, which often is very difficult with short-term project financing, thinking about sustainable models of developing long-term data partnerships with communities. And to think about the exchange and trust, the protection of communities, and the models might differ a lot. So we have the model, for example, of Argentina, where communities have real incentives in being protected, being covered in data sets. In other places, we have the true danger, like in Kenya, of being evicted if you are fully exposed in data sets. So that's something which we really need to maybe develop more models on how to make data safe, and understanding the local context, how to make data safe. And Julio, maybe for you a final word, and I think we missed out a lot of questions from the chat also.
Yes, there are a few questions on the chat, but we have not time enough, so I will just finish the thing. So just to finish, the discussion was incredible, of course. First of all, I want to thank you for United Nations Habitat, for the Urban Thinkers Campus platform, and all the co-organizers that joining us and support the proposal that we send. And for the series of events, this is just the first one. And it's a huge list of supporters, so I cannot read all of them here. There are different institutions: University of Colorado, Federal University of Bahia, University of Twente, ITC, and University of St.Gallen, organizing in the front this. And we are, of course, overwhelmed with gratitude for the support of all these institutions. I want to thank you for all the presenters for their time, the talks, the inspiring talks, and the availability for being with us today. It was great. A special thanks, of course, to our moderators, Monika and Rota. They did such a great job and organizing and driving the discussion. It was awesome for me. I was just watching. It was awesome. And not less important, and a huge thank to all the online participants. There's some participants online watching on Facebook, and they give us some insights, brilliant insights, and I take notes of everything. We're gonna read it later. And Anthony is not here anymore today. He was in the beginning, but he made it possible. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Anthony, for being the bond and putting all these people together to discuss. He was a great guy. And in the beginning of October, we will host the second event. Is to be confirmed, the date. But we are planning to address artificial intelligence and Earth observation data challenges and opportunities for slum mapping. So please put it in your agenda, but we'll let it invite soon. As soon as it's ready, we're gonna start to spread the word. And that's it. Stay connected, please. Stay inspired, and see you soon.
Thank you all. Hope to see you in the
Thank
next
you very much.